Well, good afternoon. You all set, everybody? Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm with, of course, Councillor Crawford, who's the chair of the Budget Committee. Before I turn to my own comments on the financial paper that you've had a chance to look at this morning, I did want to, on behalf of the City Council and the people of the City of Toronto, express my extreme sadness at the death of Candace Rochelle Bobb of Malton, who was killed this weekend. She was 35 years old. She was 5 months pregnant. And her death, as any death of this kind in our city, is a tragedy, and it's a travesty. And I want to express my sympathy to her friends and to her family. And my heart goes out in particular to her baby. No baby should come into this world without a mother, and it really, I think, will hopefully redouble our efforts to deal with all of these kinds of incidents, including this one. I'm relieved that the baby is in stable condition, and I thank all of our first responders and health professionals who helped to make sure that the operation was performed and that the baby was given good hospital care. I think the most important thing, and I've spoken this morning with both Deputy Chief Frederico and with the Deputy Mayor Crisanti, I would ask that anyone, for the sake of this baby and the late mother, that has any information about this tragic shooting, come forward and share that information with the police or with Crime Stoppers. We just have to have the cooperation of every single person that we can in dealing with these kinds of incidents, because this kind of violence, I think, is something that every person in Toronto would agree is completely unacceptable. Neighborhoods, families, people left without their loved ones. This is just not the way we want to live in this city, and it's going to require the cooperation of all the people of Toronto to come to grips with these kinds of crimes. So I've spoken with the Deputy Chief this morning. I am frustrated with respect to some of these increased levels of crime and shooting that we're seeing in our city. They have informed me, for example, in the northwest corner of the city since February, they've made 86 arrests and seized 11 guns, but obviously there's more to be done, and they know that. We know that, and I hope that the public will help certainly in this particular case and in any other case to help us to deal with this situation. This is our city, and we need to stand together in the face of this kind of senseless violence. And so I hope that people will cooperate in that regard. If I can move now to discuss the city's finances. As you know, the city manager released a report on the financial outlook for Toronto this morning. It is meant to be a report that is different from that which you are accustomed to. Yes, it points to serious financial challenges facing the city for 2017, as has been the case in other years. But even more so, I think it represents the single most honest, transparent look at the city's finances in a long, long time. It challenges us and the people we represent to make some very important decisions. The report challenges us on spending. For many years, including the year and a half that I've been mayor, we have seen the following positions taken by some councillors and, yes, by officials as well. Position is taken that no service can be contracted out or delivered in an alternate manner, no matter what the evidence says. Sometimes the position is taken that no efficiencies can really be achieved, so we just have to accept the fact that we need to spend more. For example, when asked to identify 2% inefficiencies in the last budget process, several of those asked just said no and made no submission. That such a result could occur is in and of itself a significant problem. We're told that no asset can ever be sold, even if it is clear that public ownership doesn't really make a difference, even when it is clear that scarce public resources could be better put to work building transit or housing. I'm here to say that all of these things have to change, at least to the point where you're open to having a discussion about doing these things. We simply have to start having an honest discussion about the options that are in front of us, all of them, as a means of addressing the needs to build the city of the 21st century with proper public transportation, with adequate affordable housing. I think that is the real message of the city manager's report. We simply cannot do on a continuing basis what we have been doing, that the same old way won't cut it anymore. Mr. Wallace makes particular note of the role that city agencies and corporations and other such organizations have played in our current fiscal situation. To put it plainly, these agencies represent a huge percentage of the city's operating and capital expenditures and the biggest source of spending pressure going forward. In the same spirit of honesty and candor, I will say to you that based on old habits and practices, which I think had become accepted over the years, some of those very same bodies, including some of the ones that are the biggest spenders in the city, sent us a few sheets of paper summarizing their budgets and assumed that would be adequate, as it has been in the past. Well, it wasn't adequate. We didn't accept it this past year, and it won't be acceptable going forward. We dug deeper, and as we received more information, it allowed us to better understand the challenge outlined by Mr. Wallace in his report, because as you can see, and as Councillor Crawford and I know very well, a lot of the pressure you see identified comes from some of these bigger agencies. No real surprise there. It also brought to light the consequences of some past decisions, which will, now that they've been unearthed, have negative financial consequences in the years ahead. For example, we uncovered details of the decisions taken by prior administrations to rack up huge amounts of debt in an account called unfinanced capital. In essence, the city borrowed money without an identified means of repayment, and accordingly, those amounts of money were never added to the declared debt of the city. Doing this meant the city avoided having to declare the interest costs on that money, as would have been the case if it was added to the debt in the normal course. In 2013 alone, some $300 million was added to this account. When I learned of this account, the total unfinanced capital, that means undeclared debt, had reached nearly $1 billion. Now, let me be clear. There may have to be some outstanding balance in an account like this on account of timing. The expenditure that has to be made to do a subway extension may not match up with the timing on which you can issue a new bond that is part of the city's declared debt. But I will say this to you and to the people of Toronto. $1 billion of undeclared debt that is unaccounted for and not transparent is not being honest with the public, and it is not acceptable to me. And I can tell you that we have now begun to set this right by issuing debt and acknowledging the interest costs that go with it. And that will result in some additional interest costs that are part of the financial challenge that we face for 2017. I've also recently learned, as another example of things that came about as a result of our making additional and more in-depth inquiries of some of these corporations and agencies, that Toronto Community Housing borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars many years ago in connection with the Regent Park revitalizations. It was never approved by City Council and was not accompanied by a repayment plan of any kind. Now, we're beginning to set this right at a cost to taxpayers of $23 million per year. This amount, just as an example, again, forms a part of the 2017 challenge that we face. These are just two examples of what comes from greater transparency, greater diligence, and greater honesty with the taxpayers. And I believe it's what people expect from their government, an honest, fair, and transparent account of the city's finances. We've similarly begun to get things right on major capital projects, from software to transit stations. Past overruns have cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars, which is why I've created a capital projects committee that meets once a month. And while we won't achieve perfection, we at least have a place now where top city management report directly to me in answer to the question, are these projects on time, are they on budget, and if not, what are we going to do about it? We have a relatively new mayor and city manager, and we are determined, together, working with Gary Crawford and with the other members of City Council, to do things differently, to do things better, to be more honest and transparent with the people, even when the news isn't good. In that regard, I strongly support Mr. Wallace's initiative to have a proper strategic framework for budgets, to produce greatly increased transparency, accountability, and responsiveness. This will also significantly increase and improve the oversight on the budgets of major city agencies and produce more accountability to City Council, which at the end of the day has the responsibility for overseeing all of these organizations. I also strongly support meaningful 5-year financial forecasts for the city as a means of reducing surprises, forcing better planning, and more collaboration. Now, of course, we must address revenues. In acknowledging this, I want to make it clear that for purposes of the annual operating budget, I will not support raising residential property taxes beyond the rate of inflation. I have already proposed and received council approval for a modest 0.5% residential property tax levy to kickstart the City Building Fund for transit and housing. As far as I'm concerned, we cannot put our financial problems on the backs of homeowners through their property tax bills. In conversation after conversation, from seniors on fixed incomes to young families that are struggling to afford home ownership and many other families who are just struggling to make ends meet, the message is the same. They are stretched to the limit and they can't sustain more, especially when it comes to their property taxes, which for some of them would make the difference between staying in their homes and not. To be clear, while I intend to examine measures to address the city's revenue challenges, both short and long term, I will not be proposing or supporting any raise in property taxes beyond the rate of inflation for purposes of the annual operating budget. We are, of course, anticipating an additional report from the city manager on other ways in which we can raise funds other than through the residential property tax. Once that report is received, we will move to ensure that the city has a sustainable source of revenue to finance the building and operation of transit in Toronto and the supply and repair of housing. I'm encouraged by the greater participation of other governments in these areas, but I do not believe we are at the point we need to be at in terms of their support for transit and housing. I don't expect them to solve this entire problem, but I do think the people of Toronto should have reason to expect those governments to continue to increase their level of support for the biggest city in Canada. I should also say that notwithstanding the open invitation to councillors and others to submit proposals as to how we would finance the city building fund beyond the modest 0.5% residential tax levy that I suggested on the day I announced it, we have received exactly 0 suggestions from them. And so I'm very hopeful that they will help us as we embark on this revenue discussion to help to identify ways in which they would think it is best to raise this money to do this kind of building we have to do for the city of the 21st century. This report and the discussions to follow have to start, as I believe they have, with much greater honesty and transparency. And then it becomes about leadership, the setting of priorities and the making of difficult choices. We have a lot of work to do. It won't be easy, but I believe the city is in a good place right now. We're starting down a path where we're going to be open and transparent and accountable, because if we want to build a great city, as I believe the people of Toronto do, a city that moves, a city that works, and a city that cares, we have to make some tough decisions and we have to make some smart investments. These are decisions and investments that have been put off for far too long, and I think today represents the beginning of a process that will hopefully lead us to making those decisions and making those smart investments and doing all of that in the fairest and most prudent way possible. So those are my comments on the statement, and I'm happy to answer your questions on that or any other matter that is on your mind today.
Revenue tools have come up many times in the past and voted down and soundly rejected by many. Do you think that they can be passed? Are they crucial to move forward, and do you think you can get some passed?
I think the vast majority of city councillors understand the fact that we must continue to build public transportation. We can't do the old routine of building one project and then standing and admiring it for a few years and then maybe moving on to the next one. We've got to address affordable housing and repairing our social housing. And I think when they look at those two things alone, they will know that we're going to have to make sure we have the revenues from, they can only come from one place. Now, they can come from the other governments, and I hope there'll be more of that, as I said. But in the end, the taxpayers are going to have to help us in a partnership where we take care with their money, but that we invest it in these things because we have to.
How have we gone to this position? How have we gone to this state, in your opinion?
I think we have been lucky in some respects in that things like the land transfer tax, as Mr. Wallace's report pointed out, have skated us onside. Some of these decisions haven't really come to light that now sort of put more pressure on, and so we haven't really had to focus on those things, such as the two I mentioned. And I think we've kicked a number of decisions down the road. When I say we, a lot of it before my time, but nonetheless, I'm here now. And I think what I'm saying today is it's time to start really laying all the cards on the table in terms of all of the facts and inviting the public and the councillors to join us in a partnership to go forward and address these things, to build the transit, to get the housing done, and just to get things done.
Mr. Mayor, going back to the gun violence, you talked about the arrests, the guns that are seized. What more can be done? I mean, we've seen what's happened with this young mother. What's the next step?
It's very frustrating. You know, there's often a number of things you can point to that deal with the kind of longer-term ways of dealing with these things in the communities, and I think we're doing more of those things, and we should continue to do more. But at the end of the day, the bottom line problem at the moment is too many people carrying too many guns, and when you have a gun in your pocket, then I guess when the occasion arises, you're, you know, more likely to use it than if you didn't have one. And so I'm deeply frustrated by this. I'm deeply concerned about it. I will be talking both today, as I've done already, but in future days with the police to offer them any support that I can, and I hope the people will step up, you know, in light of all that's gone on so far this year, and really step forward to help, because we need their cooperation to solve some of these crimes.